Well, hello, friends and nonprofit leaders. Laura Zelke here. I'm your host of the Your Nonprofit Life podcast. And today I have the honor of interviewing the president of the Rutgers African-American Alumni Alliance, Incorporated, Kendall Hall. Rutgers is the 8th oldest college in the United States, having received its charter in 1766. That's 10 years before the Revolution. Recent research documents the university's foundation on land taken from the indigenous Lenape people, and also addressing the fact that the university benefited from slave labor and funds derived from the buying and selling of slaves. As you can imagine, it's not easy creating a sense of belonging for students whose ancestors were directly impacted by this. And for decades, centuries really, there was no association specifically dedicated to serving the alumni of African descent. But that all changed in 1989 when students banded together to form the original Rutgers African-American Alumni Alliance on campus. RAAA was relaunched in 2001 and incorporated in 2006 as an all-volunteer organization serving the African, Afro-Asian, Black, African-American, Afro-Caribbean, and Afro-Latinx alumni, encompassing all of Rutgers University's undergraduate and graduate schools in New Jersey. In this episode, my guest, Kendall Hall, shares her passion for building unity and developing camaraderie among students, faculty, and staff of African descent, not only as alumni, but possibly just as important while they are actively enrolled in studies at the university. She explains how a student's experience of belonging while studying at the university directly impacts their involvement as alumni, which indirectly impacts the experience future students will have while they're studying at Rutgers. And it makes sense, right? If you don't feel like you belong at your university, when you graduate, you just walk away. Envisioning a more inclusive future for both students and alumni, Kendall has actively been involved in running various aspects of RAAA since 2001. Notably, she worked directly with the class of 1971 on their class gift, the Paul Robeson Plaza, to honor one of Rutgers' most famous graduates. Kendall highlights why this project was so significant for the university and why she was so intent on helping with it, even though she graduated more than a quarter of a century after the class of 1971. I can't wait for you to meet Kendall Hall, president of Rutgers African-American Alumni Association, Incorporated. Hey, have you ever wished you could hear some good news for a change? Well, I might have just what you've been hoping for. Welcome to Your Nonprofit Life, where we remove our rose-colored glasses and explore what leaders are actually doing to move their nonprofits from messy to thriving without burning out in the process. I'm Laura Zelke, Director of Member Experience for the Nonprofit Leadership Lab. Join me each week to explore the ups, downs, and whoopsie daisies of your nonprofit life. Let's get started. Well, Kendall, I am so excited to have you here on the Your Nonprofit Life podcast. Thank you for carving out some time today to talk with me.
Thank you, Laura. I'm really excited to be a part of this process. I believe I've been a founding member of the Leadership Lab, so this is an awesome opportunity. I'm really excited to be up this evening.
Well, I will tell you that one of the things that I love about my work in the lab is the opportunity that I have to get to meet different members and learn about just all the different kinds of nonprofits. And I have to say, I'm pretty sure you're the first alumni association that I've ever had on, but also maybe even higher education representative. So it's kind of cool. Now you're up in New Jersey, right?
Yes, we're in New Jersey. I am a graduate of Rutgers University. I believe it's the 8th oldest institution of higher learning in the country, founded in 1766. So there's a long history there. So we're excited. Yes, we are a unique organization, even within the Rutgers University community. So thank you for the opportunity to allow the community to learn more about our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I get to learn about it too. And did you say 1766? So that's like literally before the revolution?
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Where in New Jersey are you guys? And what's it like up there right now? Like, are you in full on spring or has summer set in or what's it like up there for you?
Today it's going to be summer. I think it's going into the 80s and tomorrow's going to be in the 90s.
Wow.
We're a three-campus organization across the three regions in New Jersey, so South, Central, and North Jersey. I graduated from the main campus, which is in New Brunswick, which is in Central New Jersey. There is another campus in Newark, Rutgers Newark, and then there's Camden in the South.
Oh, yeah.
So we do service the three campuses of Rutgers University.
I have to say, the more I am around people from New Jersey, you know, Joan's up in Montclair and the headquarters of the Nonprofit Leadership Lab, if you want to call it that. Most of us are virtual, but Joan Gary Consulting's up in Montclair. I have to learn how to say Newark because for people who are listening, they're like, Newark, what's Newark? I've always called it Newark. But if you're a local, you call it Newark, right?
Yes, very good.
You know, I live in the South, so I get it. Like shopping carts, they call them buggies. So like, they'll be like, go get a buggy. And to me, a buggy is something that you put a baby in. So yeah, jargon and terms and different pronunciations. So I have a question for you. If this university has been around that long, like that's a long time. I got to get a calculator and like see.
It's 255 years old, I think now.
Oh my gosh. So older than the country. So first of all, let's just do this. Like I would have done a brief introduction at the very beginning, but I would love for you to tell us just real quick, like a brief overview of what the Rutgers African-American Alumni Association does.
Well, in a nutshell, I would say that we build, maintain, and sustain relationships. And we work to introduce, network, and promote our community members. And the goal really is to create a space where there was none and to open up a space at the Rutgers University table. Many of our alumni, not just within my community, usually they walk away from the university and there's really no connection. So we try to serve as that bridge to making those who are disconnected be more connected with the community. And it's a vehicle for us to pay it forward for future generations of students.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit later about just the impact that your organization has had. And I can imagine the journey because when the university started, I'm sure it wasn't integrated. And so it'll be interesting to kind of talk a little bit about that and the legacy there and how that all developed. But before we get to that, I'd love for you to, you know, kind of tell us a little bit about how you got into the nonprofit sector to begin with. Like, did you always know you were going to go into working at a nonprofit, or like, how did you start out and how did you end up where you're at?
Well, I can't say that this was something that I actually chose. I think it chose me. When I got started with this organization, we were incorporated in 2006, but we got started back in 2001. And it really was about trying to get our community to come back to Rutgers University for homecoming. It was nothing more than that. We had a family and friends day similar to what you would have like at your church to bring in people that otherwise would not have participated. And that was in 2001. And we quickly realized that there were some real pressing needs that needed to be addressed and that we could do more than just simply be a social entity. And so we worked towards becoming a not-for-profit, and that was done in 2006. And I think it was the right thing to do. I actually came by the way of this organization probably as a disgruntled alum and not so much being connected to the university, but really being connected to people. And so it kind of blossomed from there. And so that everyone knows we are an all-volunteer organization. It's a little bit harder trying to garner support when sometimes it feels like a full-time job, but it's because of the love of the community that at least I'm speaking for me, that I have continued to do this work.
So I have a question then. You said this chose you. So you're an alumna of Rutgers. What did you major in? And what was your goal, you know, while you were there? And did you go into that? How did your college degree serve you?
For me, I have a bachelor's in economics, and my background primarily was in corporate accounting and finance. I actually moved to California a couple of years ago, but I'm back in New Jersey. I spent 15 years with an insurance company, primarily in those spaces of finance and corporate accounting. And so I don't know if there was a real connection. I actually went back and got an associate's degree in accounting. I think that's helped me more in this space than the economics degree that I got. But I think, you talk about timing sometimes. It was where I was supposed to be, not realizing it.
Right.
I walked into this. I simply just walked into this, and it's become my passion. I'm a spiritual person. I believe that this is my ministry, doing this type of work, and we're serving the community. And so I'm grateful for the opportunities. I'm not sure if there was a real connection, but I just happened to be in the right space at a particular time, and I've just stayed with it. I'm amazed by the fact that I'm still doing this work 20 years later as a volunteer, but this is where I'm supposed to be doing this.
Yeah. So it's my understanding from our previous conversation that you've been volunteering with the Rutgers African-American Alumni Association since 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys incorporated or became an official nonprofit back in 2006. And so I'm curious, were you part of the founding group who kind of got this alumni association started?
There was a predecessor organization that was founded in 1989, and it was after the 20th anniversary of the Arts and Cultural Center. And I believe the Cultural Center was probably one of the first ones in the country. And so that group was probably more inactive than it was active. And so I think within 10 years, it was no longer in existence. So when we decided that we were going to do this Family and Friends Day, there were some of the old members who were planning it together, and then they were just simply gone. And for us, we were not trying to reinvent the wheel or cause any dissension. So we actually kept the name. So their name originally was the Rutgers African-American Alumni Alliance. And so we kept that name until we incorporated, and we wanted to distinguish ourselves from the old, because there were some issues. So that's when our name is really long. It's the African-American Alumni Alliance, RAAA Incorporated. So there's a distinction.
So it's the Rutgers African-American Alumni Alliance, or easier to say is RAAA. I kind of like that. So RAAA, Rutgers African-American Alumni Alliance. Let me ask you this. How many African-American alumni are there? And how many have you been able to engage?
Well, that's a little bit different story. So in our recent talks, I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, we just had our announced last year. In beginning July 2020, we had our first African-American president, Jonathan Scott Holloway. So it brought about a lot of changes. And so as an independent organization, one of the things that has changed, because he's very focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's not something that they talk about, it's something that they're actually doing right now. And one of the first things that happened is that he met with us privately, and then he came on to one of our virtual general body meetings, I believe back in August, and it has put a lot of things in motion. We were actually considered an outside group simply because we chose to operate as a not-for-profit organization, which, to me, was really always problematic because we're still a part of the alumni community. But one of the things that is done is that we're now in talks with the foundation and the Alumni Association about how they can better engage our community. For some time, their model was one of white wealth, which excluded a lot of people. And so we're helping them to kind of think about and change how they interact with the larger Rutgers community, because you've intentionally, through that wealth model, you've excluded a lot of people. And so we're excited about that work. And the goal and our hope is that we would be the premier organization that would help them change how they interact and relate to not just students, but to the alumni community. We're really intentional about the relationships because relationships matter. And I think one of the taglines that we had early on is cultivating a community and building together one alumnus at a time. And sometimes it's felt like that. And through those conversations that we've had with the foundation, we are made aware there's at least 36,000 alumni who identify as Black. And for the most part, they have been ignored. And so several years ago, we created something called the Digital Village, and it was our way of intentionally connecting with our community. I think we have one of the largest Instagram accounts at Rutgers University. I think it's over 3,000 followers. We have a Facebook group that has 2,700, but our financial membership is quite low. And I think it's not indicative of the work that we're doing. We've talked to other Black alumni organizations at Big Ten schools and similar stats. We are now a partner school of the Black Alumni Collective, which is a newly created not-for-profit organization that's pulling in Black alumni organizations, not just across the country, but internationally, so that we can be a better support system. And if you're not at that level yet, there's someone out there who can help you get there. So there are a lot of great things that are going on. And it started out, again, just trying to get some folks to come out to homecoming.
Yeah, I can understand that you're going to a school that, and I think you and I talked just a little bit about this in our pre-interview, but it's been a primarily white university, white led. And I had a similar experience, where, I was trying to think if I ever in my higher education years had a professor of color. I don't think I did. And it just disturbs me. Like, what the heck, And that's part of my own DEI journey and learning what it means to live in white skin and what the white culture is and how I was socialized into it. And kind of realizing the whiteness of a lot of our higher education institutions and how so many people have been excluded. In the same way, I can also say, like in my undergraduate, there were female teachers, but in my graduate degree, I didn't never have a woman teacher. So being one of two women who graduated with my degree and not ever having the opportunity to study under women like me, I don't have that real strong connection that maybe I would have had. And so I'm curious what the representation is like at Rutgers. Is there African-American representation on staff? I mean, obviously, back when it was started, you didn't have that. And then when you have integration, you're still not quite having that just yet. And so how have things developed and what's the plan?
Right now, there's a lot more representation than there was when I went to school. But we are a state university. And so if you were to look at the demographics of the state, it's not reflective at the university. And so right now we're actually working with administrators, at least on the New Brunswick campus for now. And we have a committee called Recruitment, Retention, and Reciprocity, because it's always been an issue. And so when we became that not-for-profit, that was one of the things that was on the radar. It was about the recruitment and retention of specifically Black males back then. And it pushed us into that not-for-profit space and really trying to be advocates for our students. And so if you were to ask me, why did we become a not-for-profit? I remember many years ago sitting in a meeting where we thought we were going to get help in that space. And the pushback that we got was, why are you so focused on students? Which is a really interesting concept. Why would you be focused on students? And one person in the room said, if you don't have students, then you don't have alumni. And so the university, now they do a lot of things for students, but back in 2004, that was not on their radar, and it was on our radar. And I remember sitting in that space and someone saying, are you a not-for-profit organization? And we were like, no. It's like, you better go get it. And so that's the only thing that I can think about that was really strong, where you need to be going, you need to be doing something else. And we have done that. And I'm grateful for that person who whispered that in my ear, that we needed to be doing more. So we do work to be advocates for our students. Retention is still an issue. And we're just grateful that we are working with the administration to address that as much and as best as we can.
So do you advocate to have a more diverse faculty?
That is also on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
When several years ago, we had lost a lot of faculty and staff. And there were faculty and staff that we had engaged with. So sometimes when you don't have a community, you create one. So there were pockets of that. And so we had really strong relationships with faculty, staff, administrators, and they helped us to create this community. And so when you start losing them, you lose some of your support that's on the inside. So as a small organization, we're getting on more people who are more engaged, who are really focused on those things. We'll be able to provide more of an impact because we have the man and women power to do it.
Yeah. Now, speaking of impact, I want to have you tell us a couple things. So you guys are actually working on 3 different campuses in New Jersey. And one of the things that you had mentioned in our pre-interview was a plaza that was unveiled in 2019, and it's at the main campus. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
It's called the Paul Robeson Plaza. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about Paul Robeson and why it was important for you to have this plaza. And what was the Alumni Association's role in that?
Well, Paul Robeson is probably one of the most famous Rutgers graduates. He graduated in 1919. And at the time, I believe he was the only African-American on campus. He was truly a scholar, an athlete. I believe he had 12 varsity letters. He played football, and he excelled in everything that he did. He was a man before his time, and I believe for his political beliefs, he was a victim of McCarthyism, and so he was kind of written out of history. He is known all over the world, and as for to be one of the most famous Rutgers graduates, there really wasn't a real space to recognize him. There is a cultural center, again, that I believe it was founded in 1969. It was one of the first cultural centers in the country, but to be one of the first cultural centers in the country, we still have some work to do in that particular space. So this project came about from the class of 1971. So normally classes, when they give anniversary gifts, so this was the 45th anniversary of their graduation from Rutgers College. At one point, Rutgers College was an all-male college. I think it changed over, in 1970, don't quote me. And there was a particular gentleman, his name is Jim Savage, who he's a white man, but he is one of our most active members of our RAAA. We're a truly all-inclusive organization. And he had learned about Paul Robeson when he was a young man. And so he's been carrying around this. He admired him. And so he presented this as their gift. And this is a beautiful plaza. We had Paul Robeson's granddaughter come at the dedication. And I believe it's one of the first real spaces in the country. You can go to Wales, you can go to other places around the world, and there's Paul Robeson museums, there's all sorts of things. I think in Germany, there's a Paul Robeson, there's archives. And I heard about this project in 2014. I went up to Mr. Savage and said, I want to help, but I think in his mind, it was, we are expressing an interest, but I was actually saying I wanted to help. I had lived on the Paul Robeson floor for 3 years. Paul Robeson graduated from Somerville High School in 1915. I am a Somerville graduate. I'm a 4th generation Somerville graduate, and his father, who was born enslaved, was a pastor of the church in Somerville that my family had been a member of going back 150 years. So it was personal to me. And 2 years later, I heard him do this presentation again. And I went up to him like, hey, I'm from Somerville. I'm part of this organization. We have a scholarship in his name. We really want to help. And again, I think timing is everything. It's where someone's perspective versus someone else's intent doesn't quite line up with timing. And so a couple of months later, we have a hallmark event that we call the Hall of Fame, where we recognize individuals who have done great things either in their respective fields or in the community. And several years before, again, I'm a scripture person, I was admonished to start naming our Hall of Fame events. And this particular year was called Continuing the Legacy. Mr. Savage reached out to me again. He sent the email saying, hey, this lines up with the project. And in my mind, I immediately said no. And I said no because I had already spoken to you. I've offered assistance twice. And I brought it to the team because that's something I had to do. And I think it speaks to why when you have team members, you don't want people who always think like you. You want people who have different perspectives. And it was simply, I'm going to say shout out to Diane Hill. What she said was, why not? And you have to be able to listen to your team members, whether you agree with them or not. So it was also an exercise in you have a responsibility to bring this to your team. You have the responsibility to make sure that you listen to what everyone has to say, and it is not always your say. Even when, we were a small mom and pop shop at the time, and it was simply a yes, and it was just like, okay. And so he asked to come to the event. He tried to buy a ticket. I'm like, no, we have house rules here. You're a guest. Whatever it is that you need, we will put that in our program. You can't have 10 minutes, but you sure can have 3. And we allowed him to speak. And we have this unspoken rule at RAAA is that we don't ask other people to do what we have not first done. And so he was coming into the space trying to raise money for his class project. At the time, they had more pledges than actual cash. And you can't start a project with pledges. And so for me, I couldn't have him come into that space without me first making a donation. And so I had recently, I'll say, retired from my job. At that point, I had moved from New Jersey to California, and my husband and I made a commitment. He's also a Rutgers graduate, that we are going to support this project. And there were 2 levels. And because I'm asking my community to support it, I went with the higher level, not recognizing, not realizing what that meant. And I didn't find that out until weeks into our campaign. So we partnered with them and said we were going to help. And at that Hall of Fame event, I said to the community that we are going to raise $7,000 in honor of our deceased Hall of Fame inductees. But I had not had that conversation with my team yet. And I remember saying, oh God, I didn't mention it to the team. And he's like, don't worry about it. And so the speech ended. And I think a couple of weeks later, we met with him. It was actually in my car. I had flown back to New Jersey and I had lunch with my girlfriends. And I'm like, I have this conference call. So I had my conference call in December with my car running with Jim Savage and the Rutgers campaign manager, Cindy Shursik. And I simply said, do you have a crowdfunding platform? And they're like, we do. And from there on in, I think 2 months later, we had a campaign, and it was the most successful crowdfunding campaign at Rutgers ever. And I think within a couple of weeks, we had raised $70,000, $80,000. And by the end of it, I think we had raised well over $100,000, which allowed their class project to come to fruition. That's probably the thing that I'm most proud and excited about. I think that was made for us. It was made for me. And something that I shared at a reception is that as a spiritual person, I call that my Nehemiah project, because I understood that we were building something and you had to sell pavers. And so we went out into the community, and it was showcasing that you want many generations from now to know that you were here. And so we worked with, I think, over 45 student and alumni organizations for them all to secure a paver. And what was most beautiful about it is that there had never been a space where we as African community had actually built something on this 250-year-old plus campus. And so it's become a space where the young people go to take their graduation pictures. It's a place where people come to peace. My speech was about restoration and reconciliation, and I really believe that that's what my ministry is here, is to reconcile the segments of our community that have felt like they weren't a part of this bigger process, but they are. And so I can't say if the organization says that's the greatest thing. For me, that was the greatest thing that I think that I ever participated in. And to raise that money, it was exhilarating. Sometimes when you're giddy, when you see the thing just flashing, like in days, like thousands of dollars going open. For some organizations, that might not be a lot of money, but for this small, all volunteer organization, for us, that was huge. It was huge.
Yeah, I just can imagine, the Paul Robeson Plaza is on the main campus in New Brunswick, right?
It's on the main campus, yeah.
So when students from the other campuses see this, or the alumni see this, do you know if they've kind of caught that vision to maybe do something on the other campuses as well, so that there's a specific space or like a gathering area?
There was talk of it. And I think sometimes it was a hard sell for some people. It was a hard sell. I think for some people, we had over 450 donors. And for some of them who had been out of school 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they had never, ever given to the university. So it was huge. And so I think that made it even more exciting that this was the thing that got their attention. And some of them were quicker to get it than others, but they got it.
Yeah.
And there is a possibility that we could do something on the other two campuses. I do have a bigger vision for the community, and I realized because it was written down on 5,000, 6,000 pieces of paper that I had always thought that the vision that I had been given, that if I kept this organization alive, the vision would be viable. But I realized in writing it down, like really writing it down, is that this organization has kept the vision before me. And so I'm just trying to work on that bigger vision. I think what's helpful is that we've gotten more volunteers. And I believe I'm a creative person, but when you are helping to run a very small not-for-profit organization with limited resources, both human capital and money, that creativity gets pushed to the side because you're just trying to do the daily. And so I have a card that's before me, and it was one of my mentors. She said, never forget you got people. And so the people are coming. And so it'll allow more of my time to be spent on the more creative things as more people take on the day-to-day. Mm-hmm. So to me, I'm excited about it, but this has really been a journey.
Yeah, I can imagine because, when I think about the timing, unveiling this plaza and having it be so significant and then having COVID hit, and so then people are not on campus. And so, as we're starting to finally come out of the haze of the past year and a half, it'll be interesting to see, if that spark is there and you can just kind of fan it into flame again to create these spaces. Because like you said, I can imagine as a student, the importance of having a connection to a plaza like that. That is like what you were saying at the very beginning. If students are going in, getting their education, and then just basically cutting the ties after that, because they don't have that like emotional connection to the school, to have a location where they can gather and take pictures and have some positive, happy, not saying that college is miserable, but there are certain locations on campus that when you have that tie, it binds you. And, when I was in college, we didn't actually have a student hangout. So I went to a little Baptist college in Southern California, and it's a university now, and they have things, but they did not have those things when I was there back in the dark ages. And so there was this little shed or something on campus. And I remember that there was a group of kind of the more hipster people back in the early 80s, mid 80s, that they're like, we need a place we can just come hang out. It was like the English majors and art, and they called it No Exit. And it was just like this little room that they stuck a bunch of couches in. And there was this pushback from the administration, but the people that connected just by going and hanging out there or just, talking, whatever, we're all still connected to each other because we had a place that we could go do that other than just the main floor in the dorm, because it wasn't co-ed dorms, it was separated. And when I think about our campus, the college campus that I went to, there were locations, there was a gazebo, and, there were different places that we went to do different things. Like when you have those connections to the places, it makes a difference. And like for the students, and I think about these other campuses, I could see that being a really important thing to do, because if you're wanting to engage the alumni at all the campuses, they've got to have some kind of emotional tie outside of just the education or the friendships that they make where they go do stuff off campus. You need a place on campus that has those memories. Yeah. I can see that would be really important.
Yeah, the Power-Ups and Cultural Center, the central campus crosses over two towns. It's New Brunswick and Piscataway. And so there is a Power-Ups and Cultural Center that I spoke of before, but that's not the space that everyone goes to, but it is a major hub. And so there is talk of, possibly having Power-Ups and Cultural Centers on all three campuses. There's a Power-Ups and Student Center in Newark, and there's a Power-Ups and Library in the Camden campus, but not having that kind of safe space, we don't have. And I do have a bigger vision. I think that bigger vision would incorporate some of those things, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And I am excited that President Johnson Holloway is on the scene because he has truly shaken up some things in a good way.
Yeah.
And so, again, we wish to be a part of it. And with COVID, I can say that we probably have had more programming under COVID than before because we went virtual very early. I just want to shout out to TechSoup. We get a lot of discounted software from TechSoup and to include a Zoom account. So I think last April 2020, we had a leadership meeting. Like we were developing a really strong on the ground game through our digital village because the person who runs the digital village, Dennison, he teaches at the African Studies Department on the new graduate campus. So he's really connected to the student organizations. And he was running the Instagram account. So if students were seeking coverage from our Instagram, so we're really connected with those student organizations. We do a lot of co-sponsoring and we provide small grants to student organizations whose programming is in line with what the things that we're interested in, the things that we do. So we really try to work towards being on the ground and connected. And we lost that once the campus shut down. So we re-engaged something called the Speaker Series that we had started many years before that. We just had this one program with a world-renowned alum who's an artist. We hadn't done it, so we created a Speaker Series and we've had the CEO of the hospital come in and talk about COVID. We had a young alum who is into fitness. She did an exercise program for us. The conversations with the leadership team is what can we bring to the community, some of the things that we're interested in. I have a beehive with one of my family friends. So one of the younger team members, like, let's talk about beekeeping. So we found this not-for-profit organization out of Detroit that is changing vacant lots into bee sanctuaries. So we had them come on board. So we've had teamed up with the business school to talk about an angel food. So we've done a lot of different things that we might not have even thought about had it not been for COVID. And while a lot of the alumni organizations associated with Rutgers were shutting down, we are opening up. And so, you know, when you're a small organization like ours, you have to be creative. And how do you continue to engage the people when you can't be in physical spaces?
Right.
So I am also proud of that work in the sense that we've kept people engaged and we've gotten on more members than we've ever had before during COVID.
And so I wonder, as we start to wrap up this interview here, do you think you're going to continue doing a lot of virtual things with your alumni, or now that we're coming out of COVID, will that fade? Because I wonder this not just about your organization, but across the sector in general. So many organizations have had to pivot because of COVID. And like you said, you know, you hadn't even really thought about doing it virtually before, but then you have now, and you've been able to engage. Do you think that you'll continue to do that moving forward?
I think we're going to have to continue. I mean, it makes it easier. Again, we were considered an outside organization. And again, with these new talks, you know, we didn't have a lot of access onto campus except for those communities and those relationships that we had with specific departments. I think it's going to be a mix. We did not have our Hallmark event last year. We did induct a class because we felt it was important to do so. So there are people who that event has become the go-to event. We're looking forward to getting back on campus, but I think that we can do both. And I think that it would benefit more people if we had a mix of virtual versus physical, because our alumni are all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, I lived in California for 5 years while I was doing this work. So it's important that we be able to engage as many people as we can and not let the artificial boundaries called state boundaries prevent us from engaging a wider community.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've just been really inspired to hear you talk about kind of the dream, in a way, of creating an organization that will specifically focus on the African-American experience at Rutgers, and how you had a vision to have this alumni association. But it feels to me like a big part of your mission is engaging the active students. Going through the pandemic, and the fact that you guys pivoted to get virtual with this, I bet meant a lot to the students. My son graduated in 2020 from high school, if you want to call it that, graduation, right? Because of the pandemic. And I can't imagine being a college student in 2020 or having that be your college graduation and then it got canceled because of COVID. And to have a space online and to have an organization like yours that's so focused on, the African American experience, especially with the racial unrest that we had last year, I think it's really critical that y'all are there as kind of a lifeline to the community.
You're right. And I think one of the things that we did last year or the year before, we are really working. There's a program called the Rites of Passage that recognizes Black and Latinx students. I believe last year was in its 28th year. And we have been working on the grounds to get that program into Newark. And we were able to do that in 2019. And 2020 was the year that we are going to get it onto the Camden campus, had it not been for COVID. And so one of the things that we did to keep our young graduating seniors engaged, we talked to the Powers Cultural Center because they are the center of the New Brunswick ceremony. And we asked, could you please allow the participants, whoever registered from Camden and Newark, to participate in that process? And what normally happens with the Rites of Passage, you're given a kente cloth stole as part of your graduation. So we raised money, and then our AAA kicked in the rest for whatever students from Camden or North who wanted to participate in that virtual ceremony, that they too could get a kente cloth stole. And so I think it made a difference in the sense that their graduation was taken away from them. And, they weren't circumstances that they had any control over. So we're just trying to ease the pain of not being able to have a ceremony. So wherever we can, provides a level of support for our students as best that we can. We work to do that. And I just want to say that although our name is the African-American Alumni Alliance, that was the name of the predecessor organization. We really are an organization that's primarily made up of African-American, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinx, and African alumni, encompassing the 3 campuses of Rutgers University. And again, Jim Savage, the chairperson of the committee member for the Robeson Plaza campaign, is a white man. He too is a member of this organization because we truly are all inclusive and all are welcome. But primarily, that is our base. We're more than just a name. So our name doesn't reflect the community that we serve and the community that we are.
I have loved talking with you this morning and learning more about your organization. And it feels like even though y'all have been around for a little over 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Even though y'all were founded in 2006, you've been around for 15 years. It feels like you're kind of just getting started. Like, this is exciting. There's some momentum building now, and having the Paul Robeson Plaza, having your first African-American president, having the support that maybe you haven't had. I'm not saying that previous presidents weren't supportive, but there is something to be said about that alliance with the current president. And so I'm just really excited for you to see kind of what's going to happen. And if people want to stay in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can email us. It's at info@rutgersblackalumni.org. And Rutgers is spelled RUTGERS. We have a Facebook group. It is RAAA, or the Rutgers African-American Alumni Facebook group. And we also have an official not-for-profit page. And you can also follow us on Instagram. It's Rutgers Black Alum, but it's RUTGERSBLKALUM. So it's Rutgers Black Alum. It's abbreviated just a little bit.
And I'll put links to all of this on the show notes page, so it'll be really easy for people to find it and maybe donate and stay in touch with you and get on your list or whatever you've got going so they can follow your progress. And I just want to thank you for your time today, Kendall. It has been just my honor to hold some space for your story of how you got there and what you're doing. It does feel kind of like you're just getting started, which I know, you're like, I've been doing this for 20 years, but the momentum, and I just want to take a moment and honor your commitment to the students and to the university, that you've stuck with it for longer than most people would have. And the reason that you're having the momentum right now is because of the hard work that you've done and the blood, sweat, and tears, all volunteer, given with love, given because you have a vision, and given because you're at the right place at the right time. And I also want to bear witness that I know it's not easy. And I know that when you're doing hard work like this, that there are people who come up against you as a woman, as a Black woman doing some really important work that can be intimidating to some. And I just want to encourage you to keep on keeping on. Keep doing it. Don't lose that vision. And what did your mentor say? You have a sign up there. You got people.
Yes, I got
you
people,
got people.
Including you.
I was going to say, you got your people at Rutgers, and then you got your people in the village, and we're behind you and we got your back, and we're not going to let you falter on those days when it's hard to hold your arms up. We'll come give you some support. So I just want to thank you again for your time. And also just remind everybody, I'm going to put all the links and everything on the show notes page, and I will see you in the village.
Again, I just wanted to thank you so very much. I believe that you two are part of my people now, and you came into my life at the most appropriate time, and I needed you. And I just like to say to the village, I haven't utilized the village as much as I need to, but becoming a part of that community has helped me to see that some of the struggles or the challenges that we have had as an all-volunteer organization, that we're not alone. Mm-hmm. And that you have given me a sense of peace and some relief and guidance. I look at the postings on a regular basis, and it's been such a valuable resource to me. And it's been a valuable booster in confidence, sometimes when I really needed it, that we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
And if you believe in the work that you're doing, then keep at it. So I thank you for the words of encouragement. And I just look forward to you coming up to New Jersey, because I count you now as a friend. So thank you.
I don't know what's on people's bucket list for getting out of COVID, where they want to go. I don't know that New Jersey is going to rank high on people's, but it's my number one place I want to go, because I miss my people that I work with. And so I want to get up, and I love visiting with members whenever I get to go out. So I'm really looking forward to just somebody someday saying, all right, we're past COVID. Let's move forward with life more abundantly, right? Well, thank you again. And hopefully I'll see you in person one of these days, hopefully before the end of the year. And I'll see you in the village.
All right. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thanks, Kendall. Thanks for listening. To access the show notes or share feedback on this podcast and link over to our socials, visit our website at yournonprofitlife.com. That's yournonprofitlife.com. And hey, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you're going to love The Village. It's our exclusive online community where we take what we're learning in the Nonprofit Leadership Lab and apply it. We take it to the next level with live Q&As, boot camps, online book clubs, and legit support from experts committed to helping you extend your nonprofit life. By the way, since we're just getting started, it would mean the world to us if you'd subscribe to the podcast and leave a great review on iTunes. The reviews will help us get the podcast in front of more people as we try to take the whole sector from messy to thriving. See you next time.